Firstly, thanks for giving me some of your time. I imagine you're very busy, especially with the release of the film. Obviously, huge congratulations.
Thank you
Um,
so
how are you,
much.
how are you feeling anyway, as the release is going on now and just with everything that's going on and in your life in general?
Well, that's a big question. Very difficult to answer.
Yeah.
But alhamdulillah, like not doing too bad. Definitely a time of high anxiety for many people, I think.
Mm. I think for me, one of the interesting things about the past year from the film perspective has been I don't know if I would call it a trend, but there's been an increasing pattern of a lot of Palestinian films being released and being put out there into the Western Hemisphere. And so, of course, your film is one of them, and it came from Sundance. So it's been over a year now. So how's that journey like? A lot of people from the independent side, they often talk about how long it takes to eventually get that distribution and then the release. But of course, you're also a Palestinian woman as well, and I imagine that has its own hurdles considering the political context of the film.
Yeah, it's been a long journey with this one. It premiered, as you mentioned, it premiered at Sundance in 2025, and I traveled with the film on the festival circuit. And also, doing pre-release tours in various countries and also doing an Academy Awards campaign for about 14 months. I traveled to promote the film and kind of take it out into the world. And it was, it's an interesting time right now, not just because of what's been happening in Palestine and now across the region, but what started in Palestine as a Nakba and then genocide and sort of is now, even expanding from there, I think has made the world very aware of the Palestinian situation, the Palestinian question, and has made people very curious about the Palestinian experience. And so, I think that in many ways there have always been a lot of films about Palestine. Like if you look back historically, we have for such a small place, like quite an abundant, and big film industry in a way, if you count all of the filmmakers in the diaspora who are making work. And I think those numbers are increasing. And I hope that they continue to, because we have so many stories to tell. And historically, our story has, not only been omitted from textbooks, it is still being actively denied and erased and censored. And so telling our stories is really truly a matter of survival. So I think a lot of people are feeling that and wanting to tell Palestinian stories. And I think audiences are more curious than ever. Palestine has been at the forefront of their minds. It's been in the news, I mean, for decades, really, for all the wrong reasons, but more and more in recent years. So you have like this kind of unique moment where, the world just sort of started to realize how important it is to know about what's happening in Palestine because what is happening there is directly impacting everyone. And the fight for Palestinian liberation is tied to every other movement for justice and liberation. So I think it's been very, very interesting time, for me to be a part of this movement of awakening. People are kind of waking up in a way that we haven't really seen previously. And I think, through my film, I've gotten to be a part of that moment. And the film has gotten to be a part of that moment and a part of that awakening. It's really, truly, I think opened people's eyes to an experience that they didn't know anything about, like an emotional experience. It's one thing to maybe understand some of the historical events and facts, but to really put yourself in the shoes of a Palestinian family and to understand what it is to endure decades of political turmoil is a whole other thing. And so I think that the movie has truly like kind of changed some people's perspectives, really moved people's hearts. And for me, it's been just a tremendous privilege to be a part of this moment with this movie at this particular time.
The Palestinian diaspora, how have those conversations been like with your fellow Palestinians in that perspective, but also with Palestinians born and raised in the land of Palestine? So like I spoke with Anne Marie, and she was born in I think Bethlehem. So she mentioned how there's like since the Nakba, like 75% from Palestinians had to take refuge elsewhere in the world. So, but then all these Palestinians across the world, they became very contributory to society in terms of literature, film, science, arts. So, how is it like from your perspective and knowing that that diaspora conversation is constantly, you know, a big question because of how your country that you're in now is contributing to invading other countries, and that creates more diaspora kind of conversations in general.
Yeah, it's there's tremendous cognitive dissonance, I would say, in being Palestinian American. There always has been. I for me, the American part of my identity is riddled with a lot of problems, even in terms of my feeling welcome in this country, in terms of my feeling that I can speak openly and honestly about the Palestinian experience. And while I always have, I've always also felt that it comes with a certain amount of perhaps punishment, perhaps some things that I'm not even aware of, like I'm like kind of aware of them, but I try not to focus on them, if you know what I mean, because my focus just needs to be, um, what I feel intuitively is right and what I feel that I want to say and do and how I want to live my life and the fact that I want to be truthful and authentic. And that being a diaspora Palestinian, I feel a tremendous weight of responsibility to represent, to be authentic, to talk about Palestine, to talk about my own experience traveling there, my own experience as a Palestinian American, the experiences of my family, to share those things with, Americans, and in the hopes of, again, like kind of having them understand a side of the story that has been so subverted. The dominant narrative, we could say worldwide, is the Israeli narrative. Like outside of the Arab world, the dominant narrative is the Israeli narrative. So I think that for me, like living in the US comes with this mission of attempting to, I don't know. When I was younger, I used to kind of feel like some sort of cultural bridge. And, I don't know if I would call it a bridge anymore, as much as I would just simply say, I feel like some sort of representative or some sort of maybe cinematic messenger. I don't know. Like there's like a mission that comes along with this diaspora identity, a kind of responsibility that I have always felt and that I have channeled into my career path and my work as a filmmaker now. So I think that that's for me, that's such a huge part of what it is, to be in the diaspora and in the US in particular. And it's incredibly challenging to know, I mean, I think my whole life it's sort of been like, am I really gonna stay here? Like, from the time that I was a teenager and my family experienced a tremendous amount of racism in small town Ohio until now as an adult where I realize where my tax dollars are going, it's sort of like the question of where do I belong is always looming. It's our home countries have been destroyed, so we can't go back there. Even though many members of my family have returned to live in the Arab world, mostly Jordan and Dubai, but now we see with what's happening regionally that even those countries, we don't know if they'll be inhabitable in a few years, so it's always been an identity that is riddled with these questions of who am I? Where do I belong? Where's home? And for me, home is just, it's sort of a place in one's heart. It's a place of refuge that you kind of cultivate in your own heart, a place of strength, a place where you're surrounded by family or just you're reminded of family. I think for someone who lives in the diaspora and who has never really quite had like a really tangible sense of home. I think home becomes this sort of, um, yeah, this thing you take with you, I suppose.
Make a very interesting point about the idea of belonging somewhere. And I feel like since growing up myself, I felt that as well. When you're born in the West, but with Eastern roots, that is
Mhm.
something that is a cognitive dissonance that always plays with you because
Mhm.
you try to do so much that you can in your childhood and your teenage years to fit into your
Mhm.
Western, your secular society. But then, even then, that is not enough because they
That's right.
still see you differently because of how you look or what you even like. Yesterday, one of my friends were talking about how she's Albania and that when she was in school and having her school lunch, her food will be different to everyone else, and she would be bullied for that. And so
Right.
that kind of shows how a lot of these things are not, they don't start from the biggest point. It's always from the smallest little things, the details that eventually spiral outwards. And when Anne-Marie gave me like a nice analogy that the frog in the hot water analogy, that kind of reflects the Palestinian struggle where people kind of, what I say is that when you put a frog in a jug of water, and if it's
Right.
boiling already, it's going to jump out straight away. But
Right.
if you raise the temperature from
Right.
cold to hot over time, it will eventually take time and people will become desensitized to what is going on.
Right.
So it becomes normalized in a way. So I guess like for me as well, when I'm speaking about the belonging point, from my personal experiences, I have ancestry that is also a victim of a genocide as well, and that's from the Bangladesh genocide.
Mhm.
And I also have relatives towards Yemen and around the Arabian Peninsula. So I feel this constant dissonance with myself in the culture and in the religion as well. And speaking about the whole genocide perspective, is that 50 years since it happened in 1971, is that one, Pakistan has never formally apologized for it or made any kind of
Yeah.
reparation, if you say. And then the other is the global international community doesn't recognize it either, even now.
Right.
So, and that's obviously something that Palestinians yourself, that's been the constant annoying conversation you had to deal with the semantics and language. So how do you feel about that kind of why is the world so denial about what is so in front of the face? We see it live streamed, 4K, everything, and then we have the facts and figures, and then even the Israeli government, the ministry, they start confirming it later on. They start accepting the tolls or whatever. How do you feel about that kind of contradiction?
Well, I think there's so many things that have contributed to, I think, people normalizing Palestinian suffering to a degree that is just so shocking, to this incredibly um, insane degree that we all kind of recognized, not all, but many people recognized, I think, in the last few years as we're watching this live stream genocide and this heinous level of violence. I think it really shook a lot of people to like see this level of violence broadcast, live streamed, and the world didn't do anything. I mean, people stood up. There were marches and people, really, I mean, some people really tried to stop um arms shipments and try to block, try to really appeal to their governments and but I think this is where I'm saying like a lot of the world woke up to the Palestinian situation and the fact that it really seems that nothing can be done, that there are, that the colonial powers have just like risen to the level of, there's a level of wealth and power at the top that cannot be toppled or confronted or swayed or moved or changed. And it feels like, you know, I mean, look, these colonial powers have been putting out propaganda for a very long time, for nearly a century. I mean, Arabs, Muslims, and Palestinians have been demonized in, Western media and mainstream media for decades and decades, so I think there is a level of brainwashing. I think there is a level of people don't know what to believe because there's so many lies out there now. There's so much propaganda. People don't know what is true, what is not true. I think there's confusion. But for those who really see what's happening, there is a sense of helplessness and powerlessness because it feels like no matter what we do, we cannot change the situation, And at the same time, I feel like maybe there's a little bit of hope because for the first time, really ever, more people than ever are awake and really seeing the situation for what it is. And there is a hope that, young people today are very, very, aware of what's happening in Palestine, very sympathetic, and it feels like, all right, it's just a matter of time before people like, before young people kind of end up in these positions of power and things sort of move and shift. But also, I think what we're seeing regionally, I mean, there's just a level of fascism in the world right now, and what we're seeing regionally also has the potential to change, like really topple world powers and completely change the world order, So we're in a really precarious, um, I'd say very scary moment. And no one really knows what's going to happen on the other side of where we are right now, But I mean, who knows? We could come out of this. Who knows when we're going to come out of it, when we're going to come out of this incredibly violent moment. I mean, this is how everyone predicted World War III was going to start. And for all we know, this is it. It has begun and it could last decades. We have no idea, right? So, but when we come out on the other side and what the world looks like on the other side is, I think, I don't know. For me, it's definitely something I think about a lot, and something that I worry about, like for all of us from the region, for all of us with family in the region, for all of us living in the region. Um, what is going to happen? It's just a big question, I think, on people's minds right now.
It's interesting because I mean, your film came from the festival circuit, and recently I was at the Berlin Film Festival, and I'm sure you are aware that there was that controversy,
Yeah.
discourse about
Hmm.
from the jury denying like
Within
Wim Wenders,
vendors,
saying
yes.
how yeah, saying
Hmm.
how fiction or film and politics are separate. And it's interesting to me because one, we know that these people they don't believe that, and they've said it before. Like his previous statements was that anyone who believes entertainment films denying that there's any politics are the most political. So
Right.
it's ironic how hypocritical not just
Hmm.
some artists or people, but extends to politicians as well, where you see, there's a saying, there's always a tweet when they get into power, and now suddenly you realize they're careerists. They go back against their original principles. We see, I'm in London right now, and we see it with the Home Office Secretary 10 years ago, Shabana Mahmood. She was marching for Palestine protests, and she was meeting people in the Arab countries with the refugees and trying to support them. And now she's taking on enforcing fascistic immigration policies and even banning Sudanese refugees from, applying to get a visa in UK as a student. And that is so frustrating to me because one of my close friends, she just fled from Sudan, and she was at risk of being deported back, which is pretty much impossible, as you know. So, with the help of some friends, we managed to get a safe passage to Egypt. So, I feel like for me, my point I'm trying to make is that it is so frustrating seeing how media the normalization from powers to treat people like us, the marginalized, as just numbers, as just fact sheets to, check over rather than as people, as individuals. How do you try to, maintain your own individuality, knowing that this constant dehumanization, not just from the numbers game, but also from the Palestinian propagandist perspective against you?
I think that this is really what drives me to do the work that I do. I think that, especially in an industry that kind of could care less about the stories of people of color, where if you make a foreign language film, automatically your film is worth far less than English
Mhm.
language films. If brown people are starring and it's a story about brown people, that once again, the value of your film plummets. It's not an easy industry to navigate, and especially right now when the bottom is falling out and, studios and distributors and kind of legacy media and all of these things are, you don't know if they're taking over or if they're kind of disappearing. Like it sort of feels like both are happening simultaneously in some ways, But for people like me, I think there is opportunity in the fact that the traditional model doesn't work anymore. And, audiences are waking up and, despite the fact that legacy media and major distributors and streamers could care less about our stories, audiences do care quite a bit. And so there is really an opportunity if you're willing to do the work. And it is a tremendous amount of work, by the way. It's not, suddenly filmmakers have had to become full-on entrepreneurs. You're no longer able to just become a creative person. You have to spend at least 25% of your time audience building. You have to understand business models. You have to, put together a finance plan. You basically have to build a mini media empire these days because you have to really do it all from inception of the idea to development of the script to financing, packaging, and casting to production and now to distribution because so many of these movies are actually either being self-financed or they're being self-distributed or distributed by very small boutique distributors where the filmmakers are really being a part of that distribution, where grassroots is a big part of the distribution so that there can be that artist to audience interaction. So I think, for me, it's all about channeling whatever frustration I feel with the situation that we see, with the fact that our voices are subverted and censored, really channeling it into the work and really trying to build something sustainable, not just for myself as a filmmaker, but for the community and for the people that are also doing this work and who will come after me. And I think that that's really where I focus so that I can kind of just remain somewhat optimistic, like, somewhat hopeful, somewhat active, and feeling like I have some power to change something, even if it's something small within, my own community, that it just allows me to feel like I'm able to move forward. And that for me is really important. That's kind of how I maintain my sense of sanity throughout all of this.
The reason why I ask about the idea of maintaining your own individuality is that at the Berlin Festival, on one occasion, I spoke with Ethan Hawke at the press conference,
Mhm.
and I don't know if you have saw that, but I asked him about the recent signatory letter condemning the festival for silencing Palestinian discussions and voices and the censorship that's going on. And when I asked him about his perspective about his fellow peers, how he feels about it. And while I think it's fair to say that he hasn't read it yet, but what I found frustrating and even patronizing was how he, like many actors or artists in the industry in that side, they were playing this whole vague word salad of, all children matter, but then they aren't able to actually name Palestine or Palestinian in general. And then at the end of the question, he would start saying that I had a agenda to my question. And obviously, he got a lot of backlash on social media and everything. But a lot of the question is, so what is your agenda then? Is it being supportive of what is going on, this genocide or something, or normalizing this behavior or silent censorship. So I guess from the question I have is, as an artist, when I was looking through your Wikipedia as a brief checkup, there was a quote there that mentioned that one of the ways you feel like you can enforce some kind of shift or change is through fiction, as you see the compromisation of politics, especially in America, which is so clear to see. How, as an artist, have you been trying to take on that responsibility, knowing that it's such a huge weight on your shoulders? Because, when people ask about representation, which is a constant question, especially I'm sure you see it all the time. You're one of the more major Palestinian artists now. How do you represent your people? But then your first thought is you're trying to represent yourself first, because representing an entire nation is such a difficult struggle and a question that is always the marginalized people that have to deal with. So that responsibility that you feel as not just as a person, as an artist, as someone who deeply understands the political context and weight of everything, how do you try to juggle this kind of grief and narrative into yourself and imbue the values that you want to uphold?
I mean, I think that, like, again, for me, it's such a part of who I am. There's never been a question. Like, I don't even think I spend a lot of time thinking about that because from the time I was a kid, really understood that my good fortune came with responsibility. That I was raised by parents who were tremendously proud to be where they're from, who taught us Arabic, who took us back home often to make sure that we had and maintained really strong ties to our roots. Um, and so I think that I like in terms of like my individuality, like I just don't think it's ever been a question. I think that I'm actually quite frustrated by how many people and how many more people than I actually thought are followers rather than leaders. I just think in the world we live in, we just need people who are willing to deviate from the masses in their way of thinking. And I have always done that. Like I just don't um I'm not someone who's easily impressionable. And maybe that comes out of being Palestinian because as a Palestinian, you're so keenly aware of how many lies there are out there about us and about what's happening in Palestine. And you really you come to learn like critical media thinking skills, like really critical you really learn to like look at things very differently. And I think that's probably true of many people who grow up in our part of the world, where it's just, we've been colonized, divided and conquered, our lands have been stolen, and our resources have, our countries have been kind of raped and pillaged for their resources. And so I think that, and then when you grow up outside of that and you experience that cognitive dissonance, I think there's something there that allows you to separate from what you're seeing and observe a little bit, and for me, from the time that I was a kid, I think I really did that. I think I stepped back and I went, wait a minute, you're saying this and you're saying that, and those two things are contradictory. So which one is true? I would literally
Mm.
grew up watching both American, Western media and, Arabic satellite news and watching the two and just seeing how completely differently they reported on the situation in Palestine. And so I think that when you grow up like that, I think there automatically is a little bit more distance from the situation, and you're thinking about it maybe more critically than other people would. You're really questioning what you're being told. And so I think, when you grow up like that, at least for me, you sort of become an adult who looks at every situation a little bit in that way, going like, well, everyone's doing this, but just because they're doing that certainly doesn't mean I'm going to do that. I want to understand, why are people doing that? What is the best thing to do in this situation? what are they being told? Is that true, what they're being told? I think you just really start to ask a lot of questions and become quite critical of what you're being fed. And so I think that's one of the ways for me that I've always really kind of maintained a strong sense of who I am, because I'm not sure if it's individuality versus just um, I don't know, kind of being willing to think differently from the pack, being willing to kind of separate from the pack and really go your own way and do your own thing, and perhaps even not be liked because of it, risk your own reputation or risk being unpopular because of something that you strongly feel pulled towards. I think a lot of people who speak the truth in the world that we live in, when you live in a world of lies and you speak the
Mm.
truth, you're punished for that. And that is what we're seeing right now, so and not everyone is willing to do that, as you saw. And there are some actors who absolutely are willing to do that. We've seen like Mark Ruffalo and Javier Bardem, both of whom, are EPs on All That's Left of You. They've historically spoken out, and they did so before it was okay to speak out. They did so before most people were speaking out. And then you've got people on the other end of the spectrum who either haven't educated themselves, haven't cared to educate themselves, or are being fed lies and are not questioning those lies, or simply believe the things that they're being told. And so yeah, I don't know, I feel like we're living in really dystopian times in that way, where
Mm.
no one really, it's like the truth is harder to find.
Yeah. I think for me, extending to that, I share that kind of my own, I guess, background and perception of the world. I love questioning things, people, and the world itself. I ask questions all the time, and I guess that's why I'm a journalist. And I guess for me, that plays into this when you're not compromising on your own values and you're following the truth, it then affects certain parts of your life that one is job security. So when you were mentioning about Javier Bardem or Mark Ruffalo, another actress I would talk about would be Melissa Barrera. When she got
Mhm.
fired for her speaking up about it, and when I met her about Sundance 2024, I spoke about that with her, and I mentioned to her that I find it so admirable and important that when someone who can rise to fame and be in the meat of the industry and still stand by the morals and still be willing to speak up and not be afraid to use their platform is so important because it helps, not to say it sets a precedent, but it tells people that you should, if one person can do it, more people can do it. As you said, more people should lead as well. And in terms of the job security, my personal experience, like recently, I lost my job with my outlet because of speaking about the Berlin Palestine political
Oh,
question.
wow. I'm so
So
sorry to hear that.
no, it's fine. It's something I just realized over the past month that it happened. I found out on my birthday as well. So that was
Oh, man.
that's the funny part of this whole thing. So the past month I've been kind of going through my own internal, I wouldn't say crisis, but more like trying to reckon with my own values and how I want to keep standing by them while also, you know, because for me the worry is we've seen the past 2 years, it's not just art or people that where empathy feels like it's dying, it's also journalism.
Yeah,
Journalism has
that's right.
been crushed to the 6 feet under. And before, like the main worry
Literally.
was how we see social media, TikTok as everything. They invaded the journalistic space, and then the print magazine side is no longer there. Podcasts are coming over and taking over everything. So then the written form is no longer as valuable. The money incentive is not there. People want to become a journalist, but there's no career there. But then there's also now what we're seeing with the Western media propaganda, how we see BBC News, CNN, Sky News, all these major outlets, organizations, they're all deeply complicit. They're either owned by Zionist owners, they
Right.
either have funding towards these political, maybe some kind of version of lobbying. And me, as a independent freelance journalist, I grapple with that kind of revelation. It was like a when you say that it was like a waking up moment, what's been
Mm.
going on after October 7, but it's also been such a cultural and internal shock of how I perceived, because 2, 3 years ago, I was hoping to write for, pitch to New York Times, for example, and now I know it's one of the most
Yeah.
deeply uh, evil
Yeah.
organizations in this topic, especially knowing that they've even had IDF soldiers writing for their publication. So I constantly grapple with, oh, this publication is cool, but then they have this compromising towards people I truly care about. Since I was a child, I've known about the Palestinian cause. I didn't, as you know, in the West, people only started learning about 2, 3 years ago. But
Right.
even since I was 6, 7 years old in the mid 2000s, I've known about it. Because one, of course, maybe being raised as a Muslim and I'm also like Asian Arab, I have that kind of exposure to it. But also in the community, the people I'm around, I grew up, we followed Al Jazeera or all those kind of Arab news, and we see these kind of conversations happen, like when the alleged Israeli government they left Gaza to the people, even though that's not true. They kept it as an open air prison. Since then, I've known about these charity organizations constantly over the years, how many thousands of Palestinians dying every year, and now people are acting like it only just started on this specific day when it's been going on
Right.
vehemently.
Right.
And even
Yeah.
2023 had a lot of hundreds of people dying.
Right.
So I guess when I'm saying this is that I am trying to, forge my own independent path as a journalist, but also because in my bones, in my heart, I feel like I have a creative soul. So I
Mhm.
decided that this year that going forward, that I am trying to work on my own feature film that I want to make a career out of, like not just direct, but also write and act. And I mean, you're someone who's done all three, I would say. And Sorry Baby was another film example that's similar to that, that gave me inspiration. So I guess maybe I would want to ask advice from you, knowing that you're someone that has lived this cultural cognitive dissonance with the where you're born and raised and your ancestry, knowing how the world treats you and how you get censored or silenced even now, and yet you still have to keep on going. How do you try to tell stories about truth that is often obfuscated and scattered by people across the world or people in power that try to silence it? And we know Paramount is an example of the whole blacklisting is a specific threat to people
Mhm.
like yourself or people who you work with. I mean, you're working with Javier Bardem and Mark Ruffalo, who would be on those Zionist kind of conversations in the above the board, trying to say, "Oh, this person is vocal about what they say," and they will try to interfere. And like Vanessa Redgrave, when she made her speech 50 years
Right.
ago, that
Yeah.
her film screening had like a bomb kind of threat or something. So you know that this is a constant threat and constant struggle that you have to deal with. Yeah, you fight it anyways because you believe that the truth is so much more powerful and is what sets the people free, not just Palestinians, but people across the world free. So what kind of advice would you be willing to offer me in that kind of attitude that I'm taking right now?
Well, I think that we have to be guided by our own moral compass, right? And I mean, it sounds very much like you are, and I think many of us who are doing this work are. There's no swaying us from what we know and believe is right and is the truth. And so, um, we have things we want to say. We know what they are. And, I would say like really just cultivate your voice, find your allies within the industry. Know that the gatekeepers are never gonna hand you anything. You know, our
Mm.
films are all financed independently. So you have to kind of just go where the love is, go where you know you'll find support. And sometimes you're surprised to find support in some places, you know. But certainly we know where we're not going to find support. And so we stay away from
Yeah,
those places. So I think it's really about, you know, look, at the end of the day, we all have to, you know, it's like we come into this world alone, we leave this world alone. And the way that I see it is that I have to, um, I need to have a clear conscience. I need to follow my own heart, and I need to like for me, like my integrity. There's nothing more important than my own integrity and my sense of what's right and wrong, my moral compass. And I think a lot of people in this world don't have that. You know, so automatically, I think it puts you in a leadership position when you do have that. You're willing to say and do things that other people are not. So it's not going to be an easy road, but I think as long as you're somewhat realistic about, you know, who the allies are, you know, where to go for support and funding and where not to go, then you'll find your way. You know, you build your own kind of path within that world. And I think there's really a lot of support now more than ever before, and that's the really good news.
I think when you mentioned how the world is so filled with lies, and audiences do care. They are tired of
Yeah,
lies. They're tired of being fed
that's right.
lies and being told these
Yeah.
talking points that we know is bullshit. And I think for me, I so like when you said about finding your allies, one of my allies or friends, for example, she's Courtney Banu, she's a journalist and she's on the ground right now in Lebanon,
Mhm.
reporting everything from
Wow.
the southern and Beirut
Yeah.
and everything. And I constantly check up on her updates because she posts regularly about what's going on, video reporting and
Wow.
challenges BBC, CNN, and everything. And I constantly fear for her because her friend or colleague just got killed, or two of them, the Lebanese journalists. So it's like I I think the allyship is not just from the film space, but also people outside that is the journalism, the people, the activism. There's so many parts of the industry that is so deeply interconnected. And as you know, when people get surprised at this industry, like someone asked me, is the film industry still racist or towards people? And I'm like, so deeply racist towards people. You have no idea. And I think in that way, a lot of the industries are the same in that sense. They still
Yeah.
have this kind of, they still try to suppress us and they try to
Hmm.
dehumanize us. And I
Hmm.
think for me, what I found interesting to talk a bit more specifically about you as a storyteller is when I mentioned about checking on the Wikipedia, and you can correct me if it is wrong. It randomly identifies says that you consider yourself bisexual as well, and I don't know if that's true or not. But I wanted to ask, one of the most, I guess, for me, interesting in a general sense, is that throughout the past couple of years, and especially after October 7, is the Zionist talking point is that queer what about the queer Palestinians, or like they will be the ones who will be
Right.
oppressed and everything, even though it, Israelis, they don't care who you are, they don't care if you're queer or not, they'll kill you regardless. So
Right.
what I want to know is, how do you, when queer Arab storytellings and films, they're not as, I have seen some, but it's not as common, or I guess normalized in the way people would expect them to be. So I guess, when from your own experience and how you are interested in that kind of perspective of character and storytelling, how do you hope to, contribute, or, be fascinated into maybe developing stories more on that front? And, you know, as you said, even sometimes whether it's subconscious or intentional, to challenge that kind of Zionist and Western narrative that Arab queers are don't exist or they are constantly oppressed, even though that's not exactly true, you know.
Right.
And also
No, it's very much a yeah,
Western
very much
queer,
a
they get
stereotype. Yeah. No, I would say, I mean, the label that I prefer to go by would be queer.
mm,
And I think, like, listen, we're fighting a much bigger beast right now,
yeah,
and do we have problems within our own society? Sure. But,
mm,
Zionists have no room to talk about,
yeah,
the problems within our society. And as you said, they will, they're killing us whatever we identify as. So, I think right now, given everything, the kind of suffering that's manifest, I mean, I will say, I feel like Palestinians, because the larger enemy is Zionism and, the system of apartheid and occupation and just the systemic violence, that in a way, we have more unity than we maybe would otherwise, but because of that unity and because we're fighting this larger system, we're not exactly, we don't have the luxury of looking at our own societal issues right now, and so perhaps down the road, if we ever, are free from this oppression, then perhaps we can take a look at some of the homophobia within our own culture, but also to kind of just to color all of Arab culture or all of Palestinian culture as homophobic is also wrong. That is not
mm,
correct, and that is not the truth, So it's much more nuanced than that. So I think, yeah, I think it's quite problematic. There's a lot of pink washing going on.
yeah. And I think it's also very hypocritical because we know in America or UK or whatever, they have very clear prejudice against trans people. So clearly
Oh,
they don't believe
absolutely.
they don't
I have a lot of
mm,
prejudice and a lot of racism towards a lot of people,
yeah.
and yes, the LGBT community included, and our rights in the US are being rolled back. So it's tremendously hypocritical. And also the only democracy in the Middle East. No,
Yeah. I
I'm
mean,
sorry. You don't even get to call yourselves that. I mean, certainly not anymore. I think the world has woken up to, what a lie that is.
and I mean also there's the fact that uh oppression, especially towards queer people or trans people, but even something like I found interesting with now, one of the talking points beyond queer oppression in Arab countries or the West Asian countries, because I don't like to use the term Middle East anymore, because I'm sure
Yeah,
you understand
same.
too.
Yeah,
And one of the things used to manufacture consent to attack Iran has been the oppression of women and the whole hijab
right,
question. And
right.
we know that one thing is that in France, they ban some level of hijab, the burqa or
Mhm.
something. So in a way, they're
Mhm.
oppressing Muslim women or Arab women because I mean it's kind of somewhat synonymous. And like Christian Arabs, they also at least devoted Christian Arab women, they would wear headscarf or some sort. So it's not like a strictly a Muslim thing. But
Right,
also, I don't know. It's so weird that the West, constantly lectures and tries to talk about themselves as being the country of the land of freedom and the land
right,
of where oppression doesn't exist, even though they are not only the ones who are the most oppressive, but they scapegoat these countries to make it seem like the blame is all entirely on them when it's not true.
right.
How how do you feel about that? That kind of dissonance? Because I mean, that's uh, I'm sure because you said you're Muslim as well, and I'm sure you've had to growing up in America. I'm sure after 9/11, that's been that constant scare and struggle whenever you travel or you want to be more outspoken. You have to be wary. There's a internal paranoia to how we live.
Yeah, I mean, look, again, it's like that cognitive dissonance, like it's tremendously hypocritical. And I think that, it's like, again, if you've grown up, I think many people who grow up as hyphenated Americans with kind of one foot in the US and one foot, in whatever country their parents immigrated from, and they're able to see kind of both societies and both cultures and sort of get the news from these different perspectives. I think you grow up asking many more questions. You grow up like really analyzing things differently than a lot of people and sort of seeing the lies. I think it's no it's not a shock to Palestinians, the level of attack on our freedom of speech right now, because we've never had freedom of speech. The only difference between, 2 decades ago or even, 4 decades ago and now is that it's much more out in the open. There's no,
Mm,
back then, there was a little bit more politeness, a little bit more decorum. People maybe didn't attack as readily. But, there are now, quote, world leaders who are emboldening people to become violent, to say vile things, to be outwardly racist. And so I think in some ways, I like the world is sort of catching up with the knowledge that we have had for decades. Those of us who are from the Swana region, those of us who know what the US has been doing, the ways in which the US has been terrorizing many countries around the world and decimating, certainly our entire region. So I think that now the rest of the world is catching up with that and seeing what the US really is all about, and that we've been fed these propaganda lies of freedom and, they hate our democracy and all of this bullshit that's just, I mean, these are like military talking points, the things
mm,
that Americans have been fed. And again, like we've known that from the time we were kids. And now your average American is catching up with that knowledge, is starting to see
mm,
that. So at least I feel like there's maybe a little bit less cognitive dissonance because, the American people are waking up. 70% of Americans don't want this war right now, are really questioning, like, why did we do this? Like, America is clearly the aggressor. This was a war of choice. Why did we do this? And then sort of understanding, like, oh, we did this in Afghanistan. We did this in Iraq. We did this in, and going back. And now you're seeing, like, they're seeing history through a whole other lens. And so that is, I feel like, if there was like one thing that I was personally clinging on to give me any sense of hope in the world right now, it's that. It's the fact that things are so manifest. They're so blatantly in your face and overt that you can no longer, kind of put even a veneer of like, the kind of old story onto it. You can't even pretend that that is there anymore. You can only call it what it is. And so the empire is crumbling. This is what empire does before it crumbles. And that is certainly what it feels like right
yeah,
now. The empire, it's flailing.
mm. I mean, speaking on the empire crumbling, often when a country constantly tries to go to war, that is the biggest sign. Because, I don't know if it was Israel or which country, but whenever they constantly go, it's actually Ukraine actually, where Zelensky is saying that because he's at war, they can delay elections constantly, and in a way, that's
Right.
something we know. That's Trump. He responded to that saying
Yeah.
that we should do the same thing, and he
Right.
even threatened a third term. So we know that America and of course Israel, countries that constantly try to topple and oppress and invade, that this is not going to last. Eventually, it's going to be hit by a wall, and we're seeing it right now with Iran, with the strangling through the Strait of Hormuz and everything,
That's
and
right.
the global economy, and now the polling's crashing against the pro-war favor. And I guess to go back to a bit more of the film is for me
So Zach,
one
I'm
of
so sorry, but I actually have to
um,
go in like less than 5 minutes, just FYI.
that's fine. That's
Okay.
fine.
Yeah.
So in the film, there's one of my, I guess, favorite actors, and especially his Palestinian actor is Saleh Bakri. And for me, the first film I saw of him was The Blue Kaftan, and I deeply loved that film, especially his dynamic with Luke Nazarbol and forgot the name of the other actor, but I saw something in his eyes, the way how much he manages to carry so much resolve and sadness. Yeah, he doesn't outwardly express it so much, but you can feel it. Eye acting
Mm.
is one of the most important things for me as a when it comes to performance, because you're not really telling your audience how to feel, you're showing it and they
Right.
instantly feel it. And that's one of the reasons why someone like in let's say one of my favorite films, The Godfather, Al Pacino, he is known for that eye acting. And so considering you were acting in the film, leading with the film with him, how was that experience like collaborating with someone? What was the first film you saw of him that made you feel drawn to him and, working with him and also his family as well? Because I believe his dad was in the film as well, Muhammad. And I think he also recently passed. So how is that experience like?
Yeah, I mean, it was really amazing. I worked with three members of the Bekkeri family, actually.
Mm,
Muhammad, who played older Sharif, the patriarch in the film, Saleh, his oldest son, and then one of his younger sons, Adam. So it was three generations of that family. And then also, actually, Saleh and Adam, their cousin, played teenage Noor. So it was kind of four generations
mm,
of the family. And, it really, I think, brought an incredible dynamic to the film. You know, you're really able to suspend disbelief because you're actually watching a real family on screen.
mm,
And, not only do they look alike, but they sound alike and they have similar mannerisms. And so you really, it feels lived in. And it was amazing. I've always been a fan of Muhammad Bakri. I was a huge admirer of his, and I feel so, so fortunate to have gotten to work with him in what is, I think, one of his last, if not his last film role. And he was just an incredible, incredible soul. Like, really, just, I absolutely love that man so much. Saleh, the first movie I watched of his was The Band's Visit. And
mm,
I loved him in that film because he brought both sadness but also humor. And, one of the things I really love in him as an actor and really is the reason that I saw him in this part is because he has this real strength and dignity, but he also has this incredible vulnerability and tenderness. And then on top of that, he also has great comedic timing. So he can bring comedy but he can also bring like incredible depths. He's a very soulful actor. So I mean, I think The Band's Visit was one of his first film roles. So I've been following his career for a very, very long time and have again, he was an actor I had really always wanted to work with, and this was the role that I kept seeing him in this part. Even as I was writing it, I saw his dad in the part, and I was really thinking about the Beckety family. Because what better way to bring this intergenerational portrait to life on screen than to cast an actual family off screen and certainly make my own job easier as a director.
I guess what I want to ask is from the previous flotilla, seeing how close it was to getting breaking that siege, what did that mean to you, seeing people across the world from all countries knowing maybe some of your audience and then someone led by people that all come together, different communities clashing and converging together to, speak up, but also fight for your people and your families, your history, and, try to show that the hope that you instilled into the world is not just a candlelight that is fading away, but it's still flickering.
I mean, I think it's absolutely incredible. Like every time, each time there has been a flotilla, it's been just kind of watching with bated breath, like amazed at the people who are participating and risking their lives, you know, to do this. It's really, I think it's profoundly moving, actually, to see that and to see how much people are willing to fight for Palestine and Palestinians right now. I really think that that has been one of the things over the last, 2.5, I don't even know how long it's been now, years of watching this genocide, that's been one of the most moving things is just to see people really risking themselves, risking their safety by taking part in flotillas and sit-ins and getting arrested and all the things that people have been doing, that activists have been doing to bring attention to what is happening in Palestine. It's been really heartening. And I think part of what gives all of us hope, especially Palestinians, especially I'm sure, if I have hope, I'm sure the Palestinians who live there, it gives them even greater hope. It gives them, like, I feel like a reason to keep going, to know that there are people out there like fighting for them. If I feel that, I just imagine that Palestinians living in Gaza, living, attempting to survive a genocide, that must be one of the things that gives them strength to keep going. And so I just find it really, really beautiful and inspiring.
Really put. And thanks so much for your time. I really learned a lot from your perspective, and it's so important for me because, I find it more important than ever to be consistently having these conversations because the easiest
Yeah,
thing to do right now is to forget. And the only way you
right,
can keep remembering is to keep on talking. So I don't want
right.
to take up any more of your time. And, hopefully I look forward to seeing the release thrive and your next films that goes
Thank
on,
you
or
so much.
even the TV part that I'll hopefully get to talk about some other time. And hopefully it'll be great to stay in touch in that since
Yeah,
then.
definitely. Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. It was really nice to talk to you.